Hello, my name is Kamara Holloway. I'm the project manager for the Romare Bearden Digital Catalog Raisonné here at the Wildenstein-Plattner Institute. I'm pleased to welcome you to this webinar series, Enduring Legacy, Conversations on Bearden. This event considers Bearden's ongoing influence and impact 36 years after his passing. The precedent of his art and life continues to be relevant to our own times as we grapple with similar artistic and social concerns, especially related to issues of race in America and beyond. Along with the forthcoming catalog raisonné that will serve as a vital resource about the artists of, this programming provides an opportunity to delve deep into Bearden's world. To that end, the WPI also hosts the digitized Romare Bearden papers on our website, which showcases a range of materials from the artist's personal archive. We encourage you to check it out at wpi.art. This series features conversations with three speakers whose scholarship and practice engage with Bearden's formulation of the visual world. Today, we will be conversing with the artist Kahlil Robert Irving. His work is currently being presented in two solo exhibitions, Antics and Models, My Theater to Your Eyes at the Nerman Museum in Kansas City, and Archeology of the Present at the Mildred Lane Kemper Art Museum in St. Louis. Our two previous speakers were Charlie Farrell, the Romare Bearden Fellow at the St. Louis Art Museum on May 8th, and Anne Monahan, an independent art historian, on May 15th. You can learn more about all of the talks on our website. The series is being recorded, and you will find the videos posted on our YouTube channel and on our website. Before we begin our conversation, I want to let you know that we will take questions from the audience and invite you to submit any questions that you may have using the Q&A feature that can be found at the bottom of your screen. So with that, I'd like to welcome Kahlil Robert Irving, and we will get started. First of all, I would like to start with a question about your background and what prompted you to pursue art to begin with.
Thank you so much for having me. I started making art as an escape. Going to a community art center in middle school and high school was a way to kind of be a part of a different community than I was a part of at home, meeting other people, people who are excited about making things with their hands. And then in 2016, I met a woman named Pam Kescommit, and she was a teacher for a portfolio development program that I was a part of. And she suggested that I go to the Art Institute in Kansas City. I applied to two schools. I applied to SAIC and the Kansas City Art Institute, and that's kind of what I did. And from there, I got a scholarship to attend college. And I don't think I had been making things, I think, up for 9 years up to that point. In the middle of college, that's when I thought of myself as an artist.
Okay. Did you have any other mentors?
I've had a lot of mentors, people at a distance and people in close proximity, ranging from faculty at the university. One of my professors, I went on 2 or 3 study travel program trips with him. His name is Russell Ferguson. In graduate school, I had an advisor and mentor, and now a friend named Denise Ward Brown, who's a documentary filmmaker and sculptor that lives in St. Louis. And I do I do have to say I also owe a lot to listening to all of Kara James Marshall's lectures on YouTube in college and in graduate school, because the intent and the kind of focus and desire that he communicates in his presentations kind of led to a certain level of inquiry, commitment, and ferocity by which I like engage making and think through making.
So thinking of people who've been influences on you, can you tell us where you first learned about Bearden in your journey?
I think I first learned about Romare Bearden when I was in middle school. And we were, I think in middle school, I took one art class in those 3 years, but for the most part, I was in band. And the one class that I took in art class was it was a drawing and collage class. It was a works on paper class, from what I can remember. And I couldn't really get like the exercises were kind of like those exercises in books where they tell you like draw like this, hold a tool like this, and they show you an example of what you should draw and how yours should look like. And I think in our book we had a small graphic of one of Romare Bearden's collages. But the most impactful engagement that I have had with his work was being able to come to the Brooklyn Museum and see Soul of a Nation.
Okay.
Seeing that work contextualized with other artists working at a similar time and focused and intending to kind of wrestle with autonomy and one's own agency, but also allowing their space to preserve one's identity and also make it a part of a greater dialogue was really rich. I'm pretty young, so I think when I when I look back through the exhibition history of what's been on view at the St. Louis Art Museum, like when I was a kid, there wasn't much representation, even though there's a handful of artists' works that are Black and brown. Those works aren't always readily celebrated, and it's really beautiful that Charlie has the opportunity to present such a beautiful exhibition at the museum right now.
Yes, yes. And they had said that Summertime, the work that is one of their signature collages, hasn't been on view for a considerable amount of time. So
I
it's
mean,
great.
they bought a Faith Ringgold in 1992 or 1997, and it too hadn't been on view in quite a while.
Yeah, yeah.
And it
So I'm
was a
glad they're
work
bringing it
dedicated,
out.
yeah, that work is dedicated to Josephine Baker, which is such a, and it's a riff on a Matisse painting, which is quite funny. Um, but I never got to, in my childhood, I met one of two of my great grandfathers. And my great grandfather, Haywood Irving, who's from Arkansas, from Little Rock, he jumped trains to St. Louis and met my great grandmother. Um, Haywood and Romare Bearden favor each other. So it's like a kind of ghostly relationship to a kind of like desire in art to find a certain kind of place and connection in terms of identity and where one looks to for people who look like them to be or find security, but also it's nice to also have the capacity to learn what he believed in and how he believed in being Black and being present in community. And what does that look like? What do we need to do for each other? How do we need to interact with each other? How do we need to negotiate politics or be in space for ourselves and take care of ourselves? It's really amazing to be able to have access to that through him as well. And my great grandfather was quite a bit older when I was a kid and passed away, I think, when I was like 3 or 4. So I didn't get to have that connection with him. But, it's almost like through art, I'm also able to learn from someone in a similar generation, even though they're both not here with us. But through the Romare Bearden Foundation and the legacy and importance of his work and participation in making art, his voice is still able to be heard.
Yeah, yeah. So, what is it about his works? We have here the block, which is currently on view at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, that is a work that you have been struck by. What is it about his style, his practice that intrigues you?
It's pretty layered. Having recently seen this work, it's a little bit, it's pretty close to 20 feet wide. It's comprised of one, two, three, four, five, 6 panels that are individual, but they come together. Um, there's a beautiful historical documentation of him speaking about making work. And he relates it to piano keys. He relates it to a certain kind of lyrical formation of shapes and forms, but then also still working to make moments to capture specific experiences of things that he's seeing. And the gestural qualities of how the distressed material adds to that abstraction or the gap or the fissure between directly understanding exactly what may be happening, but we're able to deal with that in the breadth or the scale of the work, that we don't have to, it's like you can zoom out and see the narrative or the desired intended information, but then when you zoom in, the distressed buildings, the in the second panel here where there's the funeral, and you see the angels coming down, the building, the distress on the paper for that building could also it could be radiating energy. It doesn't necessarily have to be strictly defined as bricks or well, I guess I want to say that it's like the fragmentation, the gaps in the fragmentation allow for the view, the information that's present, or the figure, or the body, or the building, or the iconography that's trying to be shared. It is allows that thing to have its own autonomy and its own kind of memorial of that moment that he's experiencing, and the viewer to be able to read it in some legible form. The collage or the capacity of collage. Um, it's just there are gaps, and in those gaps, I find it like beautiful for an artist to have agency, but also the image to also have the capacity to not necessarily be fetishized in a specific way. That the gesture provides protection.
Yeah, there's this idea in the Bearden literature that collage for him was um, a metaphor that described the experience of being Black in America. Does that resonate with you as a concept?
It resonates with me as a concept, and I don't know what that feels like, have like from someone living in the 20th century, from one generation or two generation away from enslavement, but being where I am now, the capacity for collage to touch on lyricism, innovation, and intuition, that is really a kind of like another translation of a hustle. I would describe it as a hustle, or a kind of like intuitive engagement where one has to make decisions quickly on their feet, so that it may be, in some moments it's qualified in relationship to life or death. And I think the material capabilities and the swiftness of making definitely have those connections.
Okay, so let's delve a little bit more into your own work then.
Okay.
Um, this is an example of one of your pieces, and you started out working in clay and studied ceramics. Can you tell us a little bit about why you selected ceramics? What drew you to ceramics as a medium?
Well, when I was a kid, those classes that I was taking were around making pottery. I love the capacity of like going into the studio, opening the kiln, and the materials being transformed. I didn't know the conceptual implications or the metaphorical implications of what that transformation into something semi-permanent could be at the time, 12, 14, 16, 18. even I think to put language to it, even when I was in college, was too abstract for me. But now thinking about how and why, it just seemed like it was just as like it was just chosen. It's like ceramics chose me. Ceramics, in a lot of ways, saved my life. Being able to go to the pottery studio and make things and be excited, but also being at the mercy of the material. The material, it can always be in flux to a certain point. Things can always be changed. This work, City County, is relating to the brutal killing of Michael Brown in 2014, coming up on the 10-year anniversary of that occurrence, and also yesterday or the day before was Mike Brown's 28th birthday. What would have been Mike Brown's 28th birthday? And so this work was made in 2017, and that's 15 years, 13 years after the first time I touched ceramics. And so when I studied in college, making molds was not necessarily my favorite thing. Um, Throwing on the pottery wheel wasn't necessarily my favorite thing either. But the fact that the material can hold my impression, any impression that I put on it, is something that I've been really holding closer and closer and closer for what helps me get excited to go into the studio. In St. Louis, where I live and work mostly, there's a stark line between what denotes the city and what denotes the county. There are 50 plus municipalities around the edge of the city of St. Louis where millions of people live, where St. Louis City is a city built for about a million people to live, but only most recent numbers, 285,000 people live there. And so these sculptures are holding the space or the capacity to look like something from life, look like ceramics, but then also reference a vessel in some capacity. And so in the middle of the sculpture where you see a large amount of information that says the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, that's a slip cast paint can that's from a mold. And then the images that you see are digital collages using ceramic material as toner to transfer images from the digital computer or from photograph into ceramic. And this process of image transfers is like a kind of evolved collage in relationship to works by Romare Bearden.
Okay. Yeah, your sculptures, these objects have that appearance of being put together with found objects, but
Right.
is it found objects or do you have a collection? How do you gather the materials to pull these together?
These sculptures are all fabricated by me by hand in the studio. So nothing's found. Everything's made by me. And so using clay, the wet, malleable material can be formed into almost any shape. And so that play on the eye, that play on the physicality of something looking like from being it from life, that just furthers the abstraction. You know, in Romare Bearden's collages, he's using photographs and fragments of different photographs or different printouts from magazines and found images. But the way he puts the fragments together, you won't necessarily be able to know which form or what place. Maybe a fragmented portrait, you may not know where the original image is coming from. And in some ways, I'm interested in that similar engagement as a kind of like a material or a formal concern. These also have grown. Maybe we could go to the next one.
Yeah. The next image, oops.
Oh, it's a work on paper, which is fine. This the fragments of things coming together and making a kind of uh, relief or a three-dimensional form is a kind of also an evolution of concrete poetry. a kind of a way of dealing with form on paper out of words, but then how does that text or how does iconography be a part of the round? Whereas in this work, Black space is almost equal to street freedom. This is trying to deal with the street or the sky above in a complete flat nature. How does sculpture a three-dimensional form or something that's seen as a kind of parentheses of our life experience? Like the road is so large, how can I make a fragment of the street but still deal with its expansiveness? But then it's relegated to a 3.5 by 8 foot sheet of paper.
Can you talk a little bit more about the street and like the concept of the everyday? I mean, that these are something that Bearden also emphasized. Why is it that that's important to you?
A street is how I get from place to place. There are chance encounters that, like the intuitive nature of making in the studio, relate to the chance encounter or the intuitive nature of engaging with other people or being able to just be a spectator to other people living or being. Also, I know this conversation is about conceptualizing joy. There are beautiful things that happen on the street. You see celebrations, block parties, um, memorializations or memorial processions for remembering people who have passed, which have a dual meaning or a dual experience, joy and sadness. But the street is where action is taking place, and to think about that as a frame is just like it's like how can the frame be the device that presents the information, but then also how does the frame also become the thing? You know, that the street isn't just a place where um, things happen or they're happening right now, but the street is also being and is holding experiences and opportunities or events that have since passed. So it's a way to deal with the past and the present at the same time. I think, well, the street, I also think of it as a thing that's engineered. It's being fabricated and made. And so if it's constantly being re-engineered or remade or redeveloped, there are histories and objects and materials and experiences that are embedded within its within its layeredness. So how do you make space to remember or recall those gaps or those the ghosts that exist in those layers? And maybe the ghosts are people, maybe the ghosts are moments of occurrences. When we think about or people talk about the civil rights movement or different major cataclysmic shifts in social interaction between person to person, we don't necessarily recognize, or we recognize the streets or the places where those things occur with plaques or with changing the street names, but the physicality of the site may or may not change depending on what has happened there. And so the street in the work for me is a way to um, deal with that as a kind of anchor point.
Um, I'm switching now to Bearden's Quilting Time, which was another work that you were interested in discussing. And I was wondering if maybe you could elaborate on process here and how his process helped inform what you make and how you make it.
But this is also a mosaic. So materially, it's engaging a whole nother repertoire of how one experiences it when you approach it. The textural sensations are completely different than seeing works on paper layered on top of each other in a traditional collage method. And so mosaic shimmers in a different way. It holds light in a completely different way. The most captivating Romare Bearden works that I love are those black and white works from the Soul of a Nation exhibition because they're so juicy, they're so wet because of the material. And with the mosaic here at the DIA, they're so luscious. The material fractalizes like the collages do, but with light and shimmer and glare and gloss, where what paper can't do. And so it's like beautiful to see the material translation.
And do you try to create that effect in your own work?
You know, it's unfortunate because my sculptures all come in either come in matte or glossy.
Mm.
Unfortunately, I don't get to do both. Um, Mostly because these sculptures are made wet and then they dry and they get fired in the kiln, then they get glazed, and then they get fired in the kiln again. And the surfaces that you see, I'm using different industrial materials to decorate and collage the surface. And so in the middle where the fried chicken pattern is covering that kind of curved form, some of the decals matten the glossy glaze underneath, but majority of them don't. The 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 kind of silvery, the black metallics, the blue metallics, the brown metallics, the gold, that's all hand applied luster. And then the text, the photographs, the Coca-Cola on the right side, that's also hand applied. Those are different examples of the image transfers. And then the green, the black at the top on the right, and a couple other spaces. That is hand enamel. So I mix the enamel with the oil-based material and then I apply it to the surface. This sculpture, He is a Man, Daily Mystery, Law and Order, Serenity for Us All, was made for an exhibition that I did at Wesleyan University Center for the Arts in 2018. And these sculptures dealt with the protest and the response to a police officer being acquitted despite saying explicitly on tape that he was going to kill Anthony Lamar Smith, a black man, in 2011. And the fractalization of the form of the sculpture is also intended to kind of hyper engage the collage sense, even though it's one complete thing, even though it's not these fragmented parts put together after they've been completed. It's this wrestling of a part being inherently part of the whole. It's not something coming from somewhere else being added to another set of sum of parts to make a whole, whereas this thing is in its entirety the object and its original home or its original fabrication is um, within it, which I think is another interesting way to, if we go back to the mosaic quilting time, the mosaic is fragmented of materials to make this work. It's not photographs or fragments from another source. So, you know, that's an abstraction that doesn't necessarily need to be or has uh, a specific intention, or it's a detail that can go missed, you know, like it could go without. But I think it's beautiful to see that Romare Bearden, even in its new resolution, it's still able to carry the same nature as the other work.
Yeah. So you were talking a bit about the parts to the whole, and this Bearden is one of the collages, young students, and it does have that sense of a unitary wholeness, even though it has fragments. And I'm wondering, you seem to suggest that you are also working with a conceptual whole, even though you're working with collage or assemblage.
Yeah, I mean, in a lot of ways, that also is kind of building from, I feel like that's building from perspective, where certain things uh, need to be seen from a certain way. I think when one is making images, you have a kind of intended narrative that one is interested in communicating or displaying. Specifically, like this work is a group of people on the street, but the perspective of the street is actually vertical. It's not flat. You know, they're not, we're looking at a cross section. We're looking at a skewed perspective of the sidewalk or the street, trying to be a place where people are standing, but also be a place where, like, the drain on the left side, where these things have to be seen from above. So there's this warping. The sculptures for me are existing in that similar kind of warping space, like how a perspective is constructed, but then the way something needs to be rendered or realized, you may have to torque it to for everything to fit. Whereas, you know, I see a kinship in the construction of a work like this and one of my works, because to be honest with you, all my ceramics are made from wet, sloppy clay. And then I make these molds that the different things that I form with the clay get filled in, and then I pour in wet slip around it to take up the rest of the space so the cavity is filled. So that's what makes them be these kind of full forms. But then you start to see the cracking in them. That's because the water is trying to get out of the material, and there's like, it's a kind of too materially specific thing, but there's this tension when the water is being sucked out or dried out of the clay. It pulls apart from itself, and I think that's a kinship to some of the seams in the collage in
Um,
paper.
yeah. One difference though is that you're working in 3 dimensions.
Yep.
So maybe you could talk a little about like how it is to work in the round.
One thing too is, I don't, when I start to form the objects, the goal is to try to figure out how to make as many flat planes that images can exist on at the same time. But then the sculpture looks like it is something from, it's like a fragment of something larger. It's not necessarily meant to be an isolated landscape on its own. And so the 3 dimensions, the first sculpture that I made like this was formed in a cardboard box. Then from cardboard, I've upgraded to plaster. And so the plaster allows me to make almost any shape that I like. And sometimes the shape of a sculpture or shapes of series of sculptures are based on how they fit next to each other in the kiln, so that I can fit as much work as possible in the kiln at one time. And the form is very free constructed. It's constructed in a very uh, ingenuitive way. But then the iconography, the colors, the image transfers, the decals, the luster placement, those are all very intentional, responding to the form after it comes out of the kiln for its last glaze firing. And so that it goes from this like very um, flexible and kind of almost free or intuitive and exciting, like get dirty experience, to a very specific, like clean cut, like specifically one edge, one plane responding to the next one. And then each work, uh, like this work is actually made in a group of 13. And so whenever I make the series of ceramic sculptures, they're all made together at the same time, and I play one off of the other. So there's this conversation in groups that occur.
Okay. Speaking about works in groups, maybe we can talk a little bit about your current exhibitions. So Archeology of the Present is at the Kemper Art Museum. And so here you're putting several pieces in dialogue with each other.
Yeah.
And they're not, each of them seems quite different, even though you've made each one. Maybe you can talk about how the idea of the exhibition came about, and then what you decided to do to have these works be in conversation with one another.
This exhibition was originally commissioned for the Walker Art Center at Burnett Galleries in last year. And when I was originally in conversation with Vincenzo, the curator at the time, he said, "Oh, I want to invite you for this exhibition, but I want to make sure that you know that I don't want it to be the same as your exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art the year before." And so I'd gone to some drawings that I had made for the conversations with the Museum of Modern Art, and I wanted to make this platform that could be an interactive experience for the audience. But because at the museum there are so many layers of audience engagement in public and institutional rules, and what the architecture of even pedestals or platforms, like what does it take for those things to be accessible to all people, it was just so complicated. And so for the Walker Art Center, I designed and redesigned with the team there multiple different iterations of this platform that people could enter onto, thinking of it as a kind of pavilion of metaphors and thoughts ranging in varying materials. More than half of the works are made by me, but there are two works in the exhibition that weren't made by me. They were made by industrial companies that produce like large amounts of them. This large black cylinder in the front that we're looking at directly in front of the photograph, that is a 3,800-pound pipe that's produced by a factory in Phoenix, Arizona. The only intervention that I have with the pipe is that the pipe was painted black, but that people could touch it. And then where those two people are standing, the person with the red jacket and then the other person with their arm outreached in the back behind it, that column form, that chimney-like form is actually 2x4s with drywall with a brick tile on the surface. So it's trying to make something that looks like a brick, like something built from brick, but it's actually a skin. And the sculpture is this composition of different iterations of things that either were made by industrial fabrication or made by me that look like the street, look like asphalt, or reinterpret one's relationship and perspective to iconography around recognizable information or coded metaphors. And so the floor sculpture on the right, where it has that black rock form next to the figure that's moving, the museum guard that's moving, the title of that work is Flat Smoke. And it's this glazed hand pressed ceramic that looked like I thought, I've been thinking about it as if smoke in a room could be compressed. Would the surface of that sculpture, could that sculpture be flattened smoke? Joining these 7 different works in this large 1,800 square foot platform was a kind of like, if I could expand the nature of how I think about collage into several parts, um, what would it look like? And I've also tried to make space to remember that this opportunity is a learning experience for myself as well. Not necessarily like, yes, some of these objects and some of these works are distinct, finished works on their own, but they are also uh, a way for me to re-engage information, re-engage iconography or a process, and that I can return to it at another date. And so in some ways, this installation is like a collage of the ideas that make those ceramic sculptures come to life.
Here's a detail of the column, and what is the other detail that we're looking at?
On the right, we're looking at a digital collage that's been 3D rendered and then carved into black granite. And so it's a 400-pound slab of granite that is reinterpreting information that is usually on the surface of the ceramic sculptures. But now, oh, excuse me. Some alarm is driving by.
City
Uh,
life.
yes, yes, yes. Um, the reinterpretation of that iconography into the surface of this black granite allows for the audience to also touch. I'm interested in engaging audience in a whole different way. The ceramic sculptures are sharp, they're fragile, they're complicated, especially for an audience, multiple audience members to try to engage with physically. And this stonework, along with the pipe and the brick sculpture in the back, the brick tile sculpture, these three works in this exhibition allow people to kind of engage sensorially with a certain kind of um, dimension that the sculptures are trying to captivate. The amassment sculptures are smooth, but they also have visual texture that you see with your eyes, but you don't see with your hands. Whereas this black granite sculpture is able to occupy both those spaces. You can see the word distractions. You can feel the word distractions, and you can also see and feel the texture that the text is in the flat plane of the sculpture, which is beautiful. And then the tile on the large sculpture in the distance on the left, that has a rigidity and a pattern to it that is another facet of the tactile possibilities of the ceramic. And so I'm trying to collage things in a kind of sensory way, collage things in a metaphorical way, collage things in a kind of like thinking about collage in an like collage is already an abstraction. But then I didn't realize, like, I thought I was making art about specific things that were important to me, but now I'm like realizing that I've started to make art about art in a way, and I'm trying to figure out how to tease it back to allow for like one beautiful thing about Romare Bearden's work is that there is place for audience to engage, and you don't necessarily need to be a learned person or an artist or an art historian to know what makes that work important. But with me, I feel like I have had such a training and an institutional engagement that I need to work my way back out of. This is such a beautiful work.
Yeah, so this is the Dove, which is at the Museum of Modern Art. And so does this inform how you think of collage, like seeing how these are put together um, in terms of conceptualizing and seeing it as something both tangible and yet abstract at the same time?
Yes, I mean, if you look in the left half of the composition, you see this hand with the cigarette there, and it's implied that that hand relates to the figure with the hat on his head, covering up his eyes. But then that hand also is just existing there in the composition, and that cigarette is lit, but ain't nobody really smoking it. And the fact that that can be there is great. Like it allows for someone to be experiencing something, and the moment that they have that enjoyment still is able to be their own, even though Mr. Bearden cut that hand out of that photograph and applied it into this collage. Like there's a moment, the abstract memorial, like abstracting the capacity of what a memorial can be, is what I'm learning from re-engaging and relearning and re-looking at his works.
So, when this is another view of archaeology of the present, you were talking a little bit about what you discovered. Were there any surprises that you discovered when you were working on this exhibition?
Yeah, I was surprised that people actually like it because I don't really necessarily I understand a certain level of craft and attention to detail and desire to execute things with a certain level of precision, but I don't necessarily always make space in my mind to think about people engaging with the work in a place of like a kind of resolve that comes into like relates to joy or excitement or happiness, because a lot of the information in a lot of the works is pretty dark, or it's kind of like it's from a space of trying to remember and not forget certain things. I recently had an exhibition or a conversation with Andrea Accia, curator of Byzantine art at the Metropolitan Museum of Art at the Kemper Art Museum. And she shared with me a very beautiful response to these. So the railings that are included around several of the spaces in the platform, those holes hold other sculptures. And when she said, the barriers there are for us to engage at a distance on top of the platform. But when you look at the sculptures released or relief down into the platform, there's an idea that the sculptures could be expanding underneath us, that they are larger than what we're seeing within these designated spaces. And I thought that kind of hidden or that omission or her seeing that in the work uh, reminded me that this platform is just the beginning, but also that there's still more space that can be mined to make work from. But then also, there are maybe even more beautiful works metaphorically underneath this platform, or mosaics that need to be excavated that aren't yet seen. These floor sculptures that look like asphalt are born from looking at ancient mosaics from contemporary Turkey, Roman Empire mosaics in an area called or a town called Antioch. And when I first saw some of these mosaics was at the Baltimore Museum of Art in 2017. They had mosaics on the walls that were supposed to be on the floor. They had mosaics in different locations despite their original intention. And so compared to the exhibition here, like here at the Nerman, the platform puts people at a distance or puts people close to certain things that gives them a certain kind of resolution or resolve to negotiate what they're actually dealing with. And then this
Yeah.
exhibition is like even taking the collage of my mind in relationship to what and why I'm making art even broader.
Yeah, yeah. I was just pulled that up because it showed more clearly one of the examples of these flat mosaic asphalt kind of pieces that you have
Cool.
put together. Um, but speaking about this exhibition and in general, your both exhibitions, in addition to ceramics, what other media have you worked with? This one has film, a video in it,
Yep.
and these flat collaged, I'm assuming this is a flat collaged piece.
Yep. On the right.
Yeah, and the flags of fabric. So what is it like working with other media besides here's the video, um, besides ceramics?
It's interesting because there are people who do certain parts of it better. And it's really nice to be able to be in conversation with and have space to keep learning from other people. How to bring information into a material or how to execute something, but also making space to like allow material to reveal itself. And is that experience, not only is that experience possibly satisfying, but also expands my mind as a maker.
Okay. So we
Got time for
last
questions.
yeah. We still have a little bit of time, but I wanted to talk about the In Common exhibition, New Approaches with Romare Bearden, which was an explicit pairing of work of Bearden's with works of several contemporary artists. And maybe you can speak about this piece, Wonderland of Many Men, Roman Black and Black,
Mm.
that was in the show, and how you felt it related to works by Bearden in the show.
You know, I didn't get to see this exhibition since I don't live in New York City.
Okay.
It was at a very complicated time, um, coming together. Um, at the time, my grandmother had recently passed, so I
Oh, sorry.
just didn't get to make it. No, it's okay. You know, she is here with us. Her birthday's next week, and I'm so, elated that she was able to give me the space. Like, you asked about art making and how did I arrive at art making. And I arrived because my grandmother told me to do what made me happy and do things that, she always talked about, are you content? You don't need to be explicitly expressing joy all the time or explicitly engaging in a certain way, but or you don't eat till you're too full. You eat to be satisfied. You eat to be content. And this exhibition in common, when I was approached to participate, they asked to share one of these floor sculptures. And I was wondering, why would they want to show these floor sculptures in an exhibition about the history and legacy of Romare Bearden? And I was like, whoa. But then I think about the translation of iconography into his works, that skewed perspective, that warped perspective of flatness and pattern that has to engage, um, or doesn't have to engage the figure, is a kind of ground. The flat surface of the collage is a ground, but he's also reconnecting the picture plane to a ground that that the figures in his works are sitting on. These works are ceramic. They are not ground. These are hand pressed ceramic tiles that I'm making in the studio to look like asphalt. So the material has to perform another gesture outside of its original intended use, similar to the images in Romare Bearden's collage, like the the collage from, was that 68, the or in the dove, the young man and the and the dove. If you look at the black, or you look at the bottom of those prints, the blacktop, those images have a reconstructed ground to them that are not necessarily seen at a cross section or looking at the ground from above, even though the pictorial plane is, it's seen, the bottom of the figure's feet is the ground, but in fact it's warped. And so the sculptures referencing ancient mosaics, but not re-replicating the mosaics. And Alain Locke, a Harlem Renaissance writer, he wrote an essay that's very informative to me, ancestral arts. He told us not to remake things that we found in Africa or in the connection to where we come from, but make things that are of or in relationship to, or that recall the presence or the spiritual nature or the spiritual connection that we have to those things and make them our own. It's like a kind of what Elaine Locke was saying seemed like a verbal evolution, like how to describe evolution without having to say that word,
Mhm.
which is really beautiful. And I don't explicitly make collage like Romare Bearden dealing with specific moments in time uh, or specific sites, but the site of a sculpture, um, like even this large work from this is a presentation at the Frisk Museum, another exhibition that has been put on view in the last 2 years in relationship to the legacy and history of Romare Bearden called Multiplicity, Black artists working in contemporary collage. But this emotive, like sky picture has these fragments of thoughts that are in different places in the sky, but the sky could be a metaphor for one's mind.
Okay. We did have a question about this work, which is this meant to be a work that engages touch? It looks like asphalt, but it's on a pedestal, but presumably there's this um, impulse
Yes.
to touch the work.
Yeah, there's a tactile desire, even for me. But I think these works were born out of making a ground that the viewer couldn't enter, but it's a ground on its own. And so the title Wonderland, Roman, like like to wonder and to wander. And it's like this I think about the Black Odysseus the works by Romare Bearden, that Odysseus was lost. You know, he wasn't, it kind of relates to a statelessness. And so making grounds or re-representations of asphalt space is like a place for blackness to exist all on its own with no engagement, with no intent, no, like we can't enter the world that these tiles are from. And so the reason why it's presented on a platform or a pedestal instead of being presented in a way in which someone could touch it, it's because it's relating to this kind of world building that's also a part of the history of Romare Bearden's work. That he is talking about Harlem, he is talking about Black life at that moment, but it's not explicit. It's not like it's an abstraction. It's not the world. It's a re-representation of something. And for me as well, I'm reinterpreting the built world to make these works a world all their own.
We have a comment that this is also a celestial experience. So the patterns of white on the asphalt give this effect of the sky and the
Yeah,
stars.
yeah.
And I'm wondering, is that a reflection of this idea of Black joy?
And Black joy, being safe, being secure, remembering like we think about heaven, or we've been taught that heaven is in a blue sky and clouds, but I also think about when people transition, like do they have to be in the sky, the blue sky with clouds? Could they be in the night sky? You know, when I think about being from a history and like having an ancestral trajectory of being enslaved, like there was freedom and has been talked about freedom in being able to be and go by night, like the jazz song Night Train, like taking transportation in a moment in a certain time. Like the night sky is also a space in which we exist or have used as a space to um, make give us mental freedom, maybe not just physical, but also mental or emotional freedom. So this conflation of the ground and the sky, the ground is the place that we're in or the place that we're on, but the stars is a place, the expansive space of possibilities of where we can be and who we can be and how we can be together despite our physical grounded limitations.
Okay. Well, maybe that's a note to end on since we're at time. I want to thank you so much for speaking with us today.
Thank you.
Um, to our audience, if you're traveling this summer and find yourself in Kansas City, you can see Antics and Models, My Theater to Your Eyes at the Nerman Museum through July 7th. And you can see Archeology of the Present at the Mildred Lane Kemper Art Museum in St. Louis through July 29th. This event concludes our series Enduring Legacy, Conversations on Bearden. You can find the recordings of the entire series on our YouTube channel and on our website. You can also check out the Romare Bearden papers and get updates about all of our activities on the website at wpi.art. Thank
Thank
you, all
you.
of you, for joining us today. Thank you,
Really
Kahlil.
appreciate it. Nice to see
Yes,
you.
it's nice to see you.
See you
And with
soon.
that, we'll say goodbye.
Bye.